And it's the first major gathering of women to express their interest. And the gathering is the key, right? It's the gathering of women. It's not individual women saying, we want education, remember the ladies. This is a group of women saying, we want rights. And once you get a group together, it gets bigger. And you can say that this is coming out of the Second Great Awakening. It's, right, 48 would be sort of the end of the Second Great Awakening. All these different turning points that lead to the Civil War, do you need to know them all? No, just know a couple, right? Just know a couple. Will not proviso, I sure as hell hope you don't need to know that. All right. Compromise of 1850, don't mix it up with the Compromise of 1820, although they were both written by Henry Clay. Great. Awesome. Fugitive Slave Act, Kansas, Nebraska, the Republican Party. Republican Party is sort of big. You do need to know the election, 1860 is Lincoln. And if you know that, you know the next year the Civil War started. You know the war was from 4 years long, 61 to 65. You know the South won the first half, North won the second half. The turning point was Gettysburg, and the turning point was Vicksburg. And now you're great. Of course, the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves where? In the South. It is not the same thing as the 13th Amendment. Somebody wrote that's the same thing. It's not. It is irregular, but AP will nail you for something like that. This was a pretty big slide, but we've gone over this enough. Rise of the cotton economy. Abolitionists. Frederick Douglass, good one to know. Harriet Beecher Stowe, sure. William Lord Garrison. Frederick Douglass is a good one to know. He published a newspaper. He was a former slave. He wrote books, narrative of Frederick Douglass. I think, and he was a major figure of his time. There's everything we just talked about. Why did I say it without that? The red states are what? They're border states. What makes them a border state?
They have slaves.
We have slaves and they're in the Union. 3-part strategy. Part 3 fails. Surround the South with ships, a blockade. Cut the South in half using the Mississippi. That takes 2 years. Quickly get Richmond. They don't quickly get Richmond. So instead, they cut the South in half again. Sherman's march to the sea, which switches to total war. Well, it's a total warfare. It's close. It's burning things like nobody's business, right? After Lincoln's killed, we have Reconstruction. Radical Republicans want full equal rights for African Americans. We have the Reconstruction Amendments. Jim Crow South. Jim Crow South is everything from Reconstruction, when basically the Union soldiers are pulled out at the end by the bargain with Hayes. Yeah, Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes gets elected. The Union troops get moved out. Then you have the Jim Crow South, and the Jim Crow South lasts until the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s. And this is the Jim Crow South. It's economic, it's political, it's social, segregation, discrimination, economic slavery in a sense. I wouldn't say that though. Sharecropping, lowest tier of economic ladder, KKK, all of these things. It's enforced by the Supreme Court, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. This is really important because this is a continuity, right, that's for 70 years. More, 30, 80 years. That's an 80-year continuity. The Jim Crow South, maybe 70 years. Did Reconstruction work? Well, sort of. Depends how you look at it, right? It temporarily works. This is the way to look at Reconstruction. It temporarily works, right? African Americans are elected to major positions. Slavery ends. It temporarily works. Then for the Jim Crow South, it doesn't work. But then the Reconstruction Amendments, especially the 14th, 13th never gets violated, but the 14th turns out to be the amendment, equal protection under the law, equal rights, everyone has equal rights as citizens, turns out to be sort of the amendment that gets future rights for everyone. So you could argue in the long run, Reconstruction, in the very long run it worked. I don't know, it depends it depends on the framing of the question. It depends what the time frame is in the question to how you want to answer it. But again, any question the AP asks, continuity and change, similarity and difference. Your answer is whatever one you know the most proper nouns for. That's it, right? Your counter arguments, 1, 2 proper nouns. The rest you're doing in your arguments and your context, of course. Study those those DBQs and LAQs. Read ones that are published online. Again, I'm not going to test you on that. Did you read a DBQ? Did you read an LAQ? It's not I'm testing you. The AP's testing you. And when those scores come back, I'm not your teacher anymore. I want to know how, I see all your scores, but I want to know how you feel about it. I want to keep in touch with you. But you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for your pride. You're doing it to show how much you did learn. Not what a bad week you had or a bad month you had in May, your junior year. I want you to show what your whole year was like. And this, I've never had a class this strong. I've never had a class where no one dropped it. Like never, ever, ever, ever. I accepted 8 more of you than I thought would be here right now, which is totally great, except for like the 3 kids who came by every week for 3 months. The first semester was like, anyone drop? I'm like, nobody. And I'm proud. It's awesome. And it shows how much you guys have learned. Just push through, finish this thing. I'm not going to ask you any questions about DBQ or LAQ, but you need to know it. And if you're weak on it, practice it. Period 6 and 7 in 18 minutes. Kelly, lock the door. Expansion west. Civil War ends. That's when more fighting with natives happens in the west. The Mexican-American War is going to happen. Wait a second. That's not right. That was before. Expansion. They have all the land from Mexican-American War. Unlimited immigration. The context for moving west. Transcontinental Railroad. They wanted to get it done around the Civil War. It finishes after the Civil War. And now the East and West are combined. Irish build it on the East, Chinese build it on the West. The economy's linked. More movement of raw materials. Why are people moving west? Mining, farming, free land, ranching, meaning cows and other livestock, religious freedom, government work. This slide is huge. This slide is big picture that we don't get to focus on normally. After the Civil War, the U.S. becomes the largest economy in the world. Second Industrial Revolution, steel, electricity, oil, but still railroads, raw materials. We have tons of them. Cheap labor, tons of land. The railroad era, little government interference. And America booms into the Gilded Age. And it creates some of the richest people that there ever, arguably, that there ever were on Earth. This guy, the AP likes him, I don't like him, but he just feels like the West is the definition of America. Manifest destiny, the movement west, our ideas going west, our people going west, that is the character of America. Don't worry about it. If you see his name, realize that he loves the West. Boom, 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 boom. First Industrial Revolution. Now, not everyone calls them first and second, but coal, iron, and railroads second. Electricity, oil, steel, chemical. Thank you. You got to know some of these guys. I think all of you do, right? Rockefeller Oil, Carnegie Steel, Morgan Banks, and he ends up buying steel. Vanderbilt Railroads and ships. I don't think you need to know that. Yes, you need to know they had monopolies. Monopolies weren't illegal. Trusts weren't illegal until they started to. 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act, which wasn't used until 1901 or 1902. But a change in America, you have sort of middle managers, white collar jobs. People are now working for wages. More and more people are moving to the city. Second wave of immigration, I think we've talked about this enough. Change from Northern and Western Europe to Southern and Eastern Europe, have examples, know the difference between those people. Far more Catholic and Jewish in the second wave, less literate, people keeping their old ways, moving into cities in ethnic enclaves, Polish neighborhoods, Little Italy's, Italian neighborhoods, Jewish sections with Jewish schools and synagogues, Italian schools, that type of thing. Know the difference between a push and a pull? Sure. Talked about this a little bit last class. Agitation by W.B. Du Bois, which is sort of the modern take, versus Booker T. Washington, accept segregation and let's make the best of it economically. Knights of Labor, all inclusive, all gender, all race. AFL, skilled labor, more exclusive, but again, worker rights. IWW, more inclusive. And parties that come out of this, the Socialist Party, but most importantly, the Populists, a combination of farmer interest and worker interests. I'm not going to go through these really. The Populist is incredibly important because Leanne effed it up on the entrance slip, but the only thing they didn't get was this, nationalization. Nationalization means the government, they wanted the government to take over ownership of the railroads, the telephone, and the telegraph system. Now look, the government actually broke up the telephone system. It was all Bell Telephone until the 70s or early 80s. The government owns, what's it called on the East Coast, the rail system? Amtrak. Government owns consumer, what do we call it? Like commercial transportation for people. The government actually owns that. Now, let's not say this stuff came true. That's the stuff they didn't get. But everything else they got. They were just adopted by the Republicans and the Democrats. They said, shoot, we better take on these ideas. One, they're good. Two, we'll get these workers and farmers to vote for us. So all these things happen. Shorter working day, currency reform, assistance to farmers, graduated income tax, direct election of senators. It all happens. They only last 10 years, the 1890s. 1890s seems like a pretty progressive time to me. William Jennings, Brian, don't tie me to the gold standard. Give me other money. I want inflation. Don't worry about it too much. I hope it doesn't show up. If they do, that's one of those questions where they're like, 98% of them will fail this and we'll have a nice curve. It's like, no, you don't need to know that. Again, he's against tying currency to gold. He wants it tied to like silver or leave the standard. All right, you had to get some of these today. You got to know some. Upton Sinclair's easy. The Jungle. Teddy Roosevelt read it. Pure Food and Drug and Meat Inspection Act. Ida Tarbell breaks up Standard Oil. Now, she doesn't break up Standard Oil. The Clayton and Sherman and Clayton Antitrust break it up, but she writes the book that gets popular opinion against it. Jane Addams, the settlement houses, but also political action in Chicago, but the settlement houses. All right, John Dewey, education, common school movement, challenging social Darwinism. All right, great. Francis Willard, WCTU. That's the group that led to temperance, Women's Christians Temperance Union. Jacob Riis, the photographer. Who is the cartoonist? Thomas Nast. He's a little before these guys, but same idea. The progressive presidents. Teddy Roosevelt, we just said, Pure Food and Drug, Meat Inspection Act, increases the amount of national park land, right? Has Booker T. Washington at the White House. Taft breaks up more trusts than any other president, right? What does Wilson do? Help people. What does he do that's progressive? What?
No, Sherman was.
No, Clayton Antitrust Act. He sets up the the federal FTC, is it? Or
I forgot it.
FTC, what the fuck? What else does he do that's progressive? Shoot. Oh, wait, I know. What am I doing? Ah, here it is. Federal Reserve Act, 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment. Look, if you're in a bind, say that under his administration they passed suffrage, although he was reluctant to pass it. At least if you say he was reluctant, the 8 people were like, all right, you get it. Still progressive, but you get it. Great. Broke up more trusts as well, but had all these negative things. Segregated African Americans out of federal jobs, shows KKK movement, drags his feet, KKK movie drags his feet on suffrage. Taft tries to reduce tariffs. Now, wait a second. These are the progressive presidents. What about the imperialist presidents? Not that different, right? We're just adding Scary McKinley, the vampire man. There he is. And this is what they did. This is a great slide for you if you want a photo of it, if you want to love it and hug it. You can go hug it if you want. I don't care what you want to do. Vampire, but good. This is really good stuff to pick up. Now, moral diplomacy, Puerto Rico and the Philippines, he's actually sort of, I feel like Woodrow Wilson is the least imperialist. He's fighting for the League of Nations. He wants Filipinos to have rights and Puerto Ricans to have rights. Who's imperialist before them? Yeah, sure, you could argue Jefferson, Jackson, and Polk. But if the AP asks you about this, they're going to give you a time range. They're going to say from like 1890 to 1920. So that's how they'll get these guys out of there. But if you have to talk about expansion before then, it's not exactly domestic, right? Because we didn't own Mexico. We don't own the native nations. Jackson's taking native nation land. Polk is doing the Mexican-American War to take land from Mexico. Joey, stay alive. Oregon. All right. We're spreading religion. We're spreading democracy. God wants us to do this shit. Oh, yeah, and money. Wendy, it's up here. I don't know. Oh, we don't need to hit these details. Hopefully they're just quick reminders. Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt does not do the Spanish-American War. Who does? McKinley. Teddy Roosevelt fights in it. Becomes a war hero. Becomes McKinley's vice president for his second term. And McKinley gets shot in Buffalo, New York, right by my house. And Roosevelt becomes president. He's president for almost 8 years, but he's only elected once. So he does come back after Taft and run against Taft and lose to him.
And that's why.
And then that was the first Taft election. The second one, it was Taft. Oh no, you're right. He doesn't run against Taft the first time. He runs against him the second time, and that's when Wilson gets elected. I got that slightly wrong. There are some anti-imperialists, right? Mark Twain, the famous author, Jane Addams, famous anti-imperialist. I can't remember any others. Good enough. World War I is not an issue of imperial. That's not an example of imperialism, right? Because we're just getting involved at the end and then we're getting out of there. It's the U.S. getting out of isolationists and then we're going to retreat back into it. I don't think it's a very important one except this part.
The 14th.
And that we don't join the League of Nations. Wilson comes up with these ideas to reduce colonialism. It's basically reducing imperialism, but most of the European nations say, I don't want to do your shit. We're pissed at each other. We want our colonies. Imperialism cartoon. Roaring 20s. Everything's booming. The government's not touching business. Boom. It's just a boom time. Productivity, technology, lack of regulation. Now, during World War I, don't forget, Russia's in there. They become the Soviet Union, and then they pull out of the war. if you can remember that, the dominoes will say, oh, that's when we have our first Red Scare. All this union muscle turns into fear of communists, the Socialist Party, the Palmer raids, deportation. During World War I, Great Migration starts for African Americans from the South to the North. There's some real positive things and some negative. Look, prohibition, crime goes through the roof, right? People still drink. People who drink then are breaking the law. It leads to a rise in crime, distribution of alcohol, organized crime. It's the rise of organized crime, mass murder for the first time in America. Social changes, women, flappers, credit, buying things on credit. Car, the Model T, the assembly line, Henry Ford. He doesn't invent it, but he applies it to cars. Harlem Renaissance. Some pretty negative stuff. Farms are getting crushed, rise of racism, I guess a rebirth of the KKK, and immigration gets closed in America. The 1924 National Origins Act. I guess I've been calling it 1924 Immigration Act, but National Origins Act. Basis on the 1890 census. Honestly, it feels like 1890 is an important year. Yeah, question.
Why does nativism cause the KKK?
The nativism is the idea. That's a good question. Nativism is the idea of whoever got here first owns it. Jonah, if you put away anything, you'll stay until deep into your next class. I don't put anything away. All right, stock market crash, October 29th, 1929. The stock market crash is the symbolic start of, or maybe the actual start of the Great Depression. Stock market crash is a day. Great Depression is 12 years. Unemployment gets up to 25% in America. It's a wreck. The government's doing very little, but then the New Deal comes. And the government does more than it's ever done before. It gets more involved in people's lives. It gets more involved in business. It regulates banks. It builds highways, stadiums, schools. And it changes our view of government forever. And that's the most important thing, is that it changes our view of government forever. It creates sort of the principles of the modern Democratic Party, and you have to have examples of it. Do I have a slide of examples? Oh no, here's some though. Federal housing. Fear of, but yeah, okay. Social Security, including unemployment, including pensions to old people, including welfare, aid to dependent families. Juan, get your head out of your coat. If you can't stay awake, we'll have to find a way for you to do less baseball. Emergency Banking Act. Glass-Steagall, regulating banks. That's huge. In the 80s and 90s, they deregulate banks, and then we have issues again. The savings and loan crisis, don't go. SEC, the police of banks. Now, where does he go too far? Setting prices and giving subsidies to farmers. The Supreme Court doesn't shut down all of the AAA, just parts of it. But they pretty much shut down the entire NRA. Huge projects, the CCC, and you can't, CCC, of course, young men working, but the WPA, that couldn't be bigger. That's billions of dollars for building infrastructure, something the government had never done. World War II, just remember how the government changes. And these are the examples of how the government changes in World War II. Japanese internment, the government says we can't afford discrimination. The War Production Board, you're not making cars anymore, you're making tanks, Henry Ford. Increase in tax, should we drop the bomb? Who makes the decision? Truman, that's so important. Why? They claim it will save lives. Study so hard, you're gonna do great, but you gotta study. Get it done, get it done, get it done. If you need anything, we're here.